Panama should not matter this much, but it does. This tiny strip of land controls trade routes, reshaped oceans, and keeps the global economy moving while most people aren't paying attention. In this video, I'm breaking down 21 verified facts about Panama that almost nobody talks about. If you think Panama is just a canal, you're about to be proven wrong. 1. Sunrise on the Pacific, sunset on the Atlantic. Panama is often described as the only country where you can watch the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean and set over the Atlantic Ocean on the same day. And while that claim needs nuance, it is grounded in real geography. From high elevations in western Panama, especially around the Volcan Baru region, both coastlines can be visible under exceptionally clear atmospheric conditions. This happens because Panama's narrow land bridge bends east to west rather than running strictly north to south, which flips the usual ocean orientation people expect. The Pacific side of Panama lies to the east of parts of the Caribbean coast, creating this rare visual alignment. It is not an everyday phenomenon, but it is physically possible and has been documented by locals and hikers. This unusual layout also explains why Panama City sees the sun bit over the Pacific rather than the Atlantic. The country's geography defies mental maps learned elsewhere. Panama is a reminder that maps are abstractions, and nature does not always follow tidy rules. 2. The Panama Canal runs entirely on fresh water. One of the least understood facts about the Panama Canal is that it does not rely on seawater to lift ships between oceans, but on fresh water stored in massive artificial lakes. The canal's lock system uses gravity, allowing fresh water from Gatun Lake and other reservoirs to flow downward and raise or lower vessels as they pass through. Every transit releases a huge volume of fresh water into the oceans, making rainfall absolutely critical to canal operations. This is why the surrounding rainforest is not just scenery, but essential infrastructure. Without healthy forests to capture and regulate rainwater, the canal simply would not function. The system was designed in the early 20th century and remains largely unchanged in principle, which speaks to its engineering brilliance. Climate patterns, droughts, and water management now play a direct role in global shipping schedules. In a very real sense, rain in Panama keeps world trade moving. 3. A country without a standing army. Panama is one of the very few countries in the world that does not maintain a standing military, and this is not symbolic, but written into its constitutional framework. After the US invasion at the end of the late 1980s, Panama formally abolished its army and replaced it with civilian-controlled security forces focused on policing, borders, and disaster response. The decision was rooted in hard historical lessons, as previous military governments had brought instability rather than protection. Since then, national defense has been handled through diplomacy, international law, and strategic cooperation rather than force projection. This has allowed public funds to be redirected toward education, infrastructure, and healthcare instead of military spending. Despite lacking an army, Panama has remained politically stable by regional standards. Crime and security challenges exist, but they are managed through civilian institutions rather than generals. Panama proves that national sovereignty does not always require tanks and fighter jets. 4. Home to one of the world's most expensive coffees. Panama is internationally famous among coffee experts for producing some of the rarest and most expensive coffee beans on the planet, particularly the geisha variety grown in the highlands of Chiriquí province. These beans thrive at high elevations with cool temperatures, volcanic soil, and frequent mist, conditions that exist in only a few places worldwide. At international auctions, Panamanian geisha coffee has repeatedly sold for record-breaking prices, sometimes exceeding several thousand US dollars per pound, which in local currency equals the same value in Panamanian balboa. The flavor profile is unusually complex, often described as floral, tea-like, and fruit-forward, rather than bitter. This coffee is not mass-produced and never meant for supermarkets. Production volumes are deliberately kept small to preserve quality. For Panama, this niche agricultural product has become a global prestige symbol rather than a volume export. It shows how specialization, not scale, can define international reputation. 5. The world's largest ship registry. Panama operates the largest ship registry on the planet, with more commercial vessels flying the Panamanian flag than any other national flag in global shipping. This does not mean the ships are built or owned in Panama, but that they are legally registered there under what is known as a flag of convenience system. Ship owners choose Panama because of streamlined regulations, lower operating costs, and flexible labor rules compared to many other jurisdictions. The registry generates steady revenue for the country through registration fees and annual taxes paid in US dollars and mirrored one-to-one in Panamanian balboa. Panama also enforces international safety and environmental standards to maintain credibility with global maritime authorities. The system has been refined over decades and is deeply embedded in world trade. In practical terms, Panama's influence at sea is far greater than its physical size suggests. Global shipping quietly depends on Panamanian paperwork. 6. The Darien Gap still stops the world's longest highway. The Darien Gap is one of the most famous missing links in global infrastructure, and it sits squarely in eastern Panama. This dense stretch of jungle, swamps, rivers, and mountains interrupts the Pan-American Highway, which otherwise runs from Alaska toward the southern tip of South America. Despite decades of proposals, the road has never been completed through this region due to environmental concerns, extreme terrain, and security risks. The area is one of the most biologically diverse rainforests on Earth and home to indigenous communities that have actively resisted large-scale development. It also acts as a natural barrier against invasive species and livestock diseases spreading between continents. For Panama, leaving the Darien Gap untouched has been both a challenge and a strategic choice. It preserves ecosystems while forcing modern travelers to confront the limits of engineering. Sometimes, nature still wins. And a capital city with real rainforest inside its borders. Panama City is one of the very few capital cities in the world where you can find fully functioning tropical rainforest within the official city limits. Metropolitan Natural Park and the nearby Camino de Cruces National Park protect dense jungle ecosystems just minutes away from modern skyscrapers and highways. These forests are not decorative green spaces, but complex habitats filled with monkeys, sloths, toucans, and hundreds of plant species. Historically, these routes were used by Spanish colonial traders, moving gold across the isthmus, long before asphalt roads existed. Today, the rainforest plays a practical role by helping regulate water flow into the Panama Canal system. From a visual perspective, the contrast is striking. Glass towers rising beside untouched jungle canopy. Few cities demonstrate the tension between nature and development so clearly. Panama City did not push the forest away, it grew around it. 8. Ships move through the canal, using gravity, not pumps. A common assumption is that the Panama Canal relies on massive mechanical pumps to lift ships between sea levels, but the entire system actually works through gravity alone. Water flows naturally from higher elevation lakes into the lock chambers, raising ships step by step as gates open and close. This design was intentional from the beginning, reducing mechanical complexity and long-term failure risks. The main water source, Gatun Lake, sits well above sea level and provides the pressure needed to move vessels efficiently. Each ship transit releases an enormous amount of fresh water, which is why rainfall and watershed management are critical to canal operations. Even today, the basic principle has not changed, despite modern upgrades and automation. The simplicity of the concept hides extraordinary engineering precision. More than a century later, gravity still does the heavy lifting for global trade. 9. Two oceans, two completely different coral worlds. Panama is one of the rare countries on Earth that has coral reef systems in both the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, and the differences between them are dramatic. Caribbean reefs on Panama's northern coast are colorful, species-rich, and structurally complex, resembling the classic tropical reef imagery most people recognize. On the Pacific side, reefs are tougher, darker, and adapted to colder currents, stronger tides, and lower visibility. Some coral species exist on one coast and are completely absent on the other, despite being separated by less than 100 miles of land. This makes Panama a natural laboratory for marine biology and climate resilience research. The reefs support entirely different fishing traditions, ecosystems, and coastal cultures. Very few travelers realize they are swimming in fundamentally different oceans within the same country. Panama's isthmus did not just reshape land life, it split the marine world in two. 10. Panama's national hat is not actually Panamanian. One of the most famous symbols associated with Panama, the so-called Panama hat, does not originate from Panama at all. These finely woven straw hats are traditionally made in Ecuador, where artisans have produced them for centuries using tequila straw. The confusion began in the 19th and early 20th centuries when the hats were exported through Panama and worn by canal workers, travelers, and international figures passing through the isthmus. Because Panama was a major global transit hub, buyers assumed the hats came from there. Even world leaders and Hollywood stars unknowingly reinforced the mislabeling. In Panama itself, the hat was adopted culturally, but never produced on a large scale. Today, the name remains one of history's most successful branding accidents. It is a reminder that trade routes, not origin, often shape global perception. Panama did not make the hat famous by weaving it, but by moving it across the world. 11. A dollarized economy without printing its own cash. Panama uses the United States dollar as legal tender, yet it does not print its own paper money, a setup that confuses many first-time visitors. Instead, Panama issues its own coins, known as the Panamanian Balboa, which are pegged one-to-one with the US dollar and circulate alongside American coins and bills. There is no independent monetary policy, no currency devaluation, and no central bank printing press adjusting interest rates. This system has provided long-term price stability and made Panama attractive for international trade, banking, and investment. Salaries, rents, and major transactions are commonly quoted in US dollars, mirrored exactly in Balboa values for accounting purposes. The absence of exchange risk simplifies daily life and cross-border business. At the same time, it limits the government's ability to respond to economic shocks through currency tools. Panama chose stability over flexibility, and for decades, that trade-off has largely paid off. 12. Glowing bays caused by living light. Panama is home to bioluminescent bays where the water literally glows at night when disturbed, a phenomenon caused by microscopic organisms called dinoflagellates. When these organisms are agitated by movement, they emit brief flashes of blue-green light as a natural defense mechanism. On Panama's Caribbean coast, especially around island regions, entire paddles, footsteps, and boat wakes can appear illuminated after sunset. Unlike artificial light pollution, this glow is entirely biological and disappears when the water is calm. The intensity depends on water temperature, salinity, and the absence of contamination, which makes these bays sensitive environmental indicators. Moonless nights produce the most dramatic displays, turning simple swimming into a surreal experience. These glowing waters are not unique to Panama, but the country is one of the few places where they are reliably visible. For visitors, it feels like swimming through starlight. Nature, in this case, puts on a light show without electricity. 13. A coastline scattered with hundreds of islands. Panama's coastline is dotted with an extraordinary number of islands spread across both the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, giving the country one of the most geographically fragmented shorelines in the region. On the Caribbean side, archipelagos like Gunayala consist of dozens of low coral islands inhabited and governed by indigenous communities. On the Pacific coast, larger volcanic and rocky islands rise sharply from the sea, often covered in jungle and surrounded by rich fishing grounds. Many of these islands remain uninhabited, accessible only by boat and largely unchanged by modern development. This island diversity supports tourism, fishing, and biodiversity, while also shaping local cultures that are deeply tied to the sea. Some islands are privately owned, others protected, and many still unmapped in detail by casual travelers. The contrast between white sand Caribbean islets and rugged Pacific landscapes is striking. Panama is not just a bridge between continents, but also a nation of islands often overlooked on the map. 14. A forgotten highway of gold during the California Gold Rush. When gold was discovered in California in the mid-19th century, Panama suddenly became one of the most important transit corridors on Earth. Long before the Panama Canal existed, thousands of fortune seekers crossed the isthmus by boat, mule, and rail to reach the American West faster than sailing around South America. Travelers arrived on the Caribbean coast, crossed dense jungle and rivers, and then boarded ships on the Pacific side bound for California. The Panama Railroad, completed shortly after the gold rush began, was one of the first transcontinental railways in the world and transformed the journey from weeks to days. This brief but intense period brought money, disease, crime, and rapid urban growth to Panama. Entire towns expanded overnight to service passing migrants who never intended to stay. Although short-lived, this gold transit era laid the groundwork for Panama's future role as a global crossroads. In many ways, the canal's logic was proven decades before it was ever built. 15. A rainforest that keeps global trade alive. The rainforest surrounding the Panama Canal is not simply protected wilderness, but a critical piece of global infrastructure. These forests act as a natural water management system, absorbing rainfall and slowly releasing it into rivers and reservoirs that feed the canal's lock system. Without this controlled flow, floods during the rainy season and water shortages during dry periods would make canal operations unreliable. This is why large sections of land around the canal were preserved rather than developed, an unusually forward-thinking decision for the early 20th century. The trees reduce erosion, stabilize soil, and maintain water quality, all of which directly affect ship traffic. In effect, the health of the rainforest determines how many vessels can pass through the canal each day. Deforestation here would not just be an environmental loss, but an economic shock felt worldwide. Few forests on Earth are so directly tied to international commerce. In Panama, trees quietly move ships. 16. A skyline that defies the country's size. Panama City's skyline often surprises first-time visitors because it resembles that of a much larger and wealthier nation. Dozens of high-rise towers line the Pacific coast, forming one of the most concentrated clusters of skyscrapers in Latin America. This vertical growth was driven by a combination of foreign investment, a service-based economy, and limited land availability between the ocean and protected areas. Many buildings serve residential, financial, and hospitality purposes rather than heavy industry. The skyline also reflects Panama's role as a regional hub for banking, logistics, and multinational headquarters. Unlike older cities that expanded outward, Panama City grew upward quickly and deliberately. At night, the illuminated towers mirror the lights of ships waiting offshore to transit the canal. The contrast between modern glass architecture and nearby historic districts is striking. Panama City shows how global trade can reshape an urban landscape in just a few decades. 17. Indigenous regions with constitutional self-rule. Panama officially recognizes several indigenous autonomous regions known as comarcas that operate with a level of self-governance rare in the Americas. These regions have their own local authorities, traditional legal systems, and land rights protected by the national constitution. Indigenous communities manage education, cultural preservation, and internal affairs according to long-standing customs rather than centralized mandates. This arrangement is not symbolic. It carries real legal weight and limits outside commercial exploitation of ancestral lands. The system emerged from decades of negotiation and resistance rather than top-down policy design. While challenges remain, the model has helped preserve languages, traditions, and communal land ownership. These regions coexist with the modern Panamanian state without being fully absorbed by it. Panama demonstrates that national unity does not require cultural uniformity. In a global context of disappearing indigenous autonomy, this structure stands out as unusually durable. 18. Opposite coasts, opposite weather at the same time. Panama experiences a rare climatic split, where the Caribbean and Pacific coasts can have completely different weather patterns on the same day. This happens because the country sits at a narrow point between two oceans, influenced by distinct wind systems and ocean currents. When the Caribbean side is receiving heavy rainfall driven by trade winds, the Pacific coast can be sunny and dry, especially during certain months of the year. The central mountain spine acts as a natural barrier, forcing moist air to drop rain on one side while leaving the other relatively clear. This is why locals often say you can escape rain simply by crossing the country. The phenomenon directly affects agriculture, fishing, and daily life, as farmers and fishermen plan around these predictable contrasts. It also explains why Panama has such a wide range of microclimates despite its small size. Few countries allow you to drive from a rainstorm into sunshine in under 2 hours. Panama's weather does not move uniformly. It negotiates with geography. 19. A canal that never sleeps. The Panama Canal operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year, with no seasonal shutdowns and no pauses for weekends or holidays. Ship traffic is scheduled continuously, coordinated by teams of pilots, tug operators, lock technicians, and traffic controllers working in rotating shifts. Even at night, massive container ships, tankers, and bulk carriers move through the locks under powerful lighting systems and radar guidance. This non-stop operation is essential because delays would ripple instantly through global supply chains, affecting ports, fuel prices, and retail inventories worldwide. Maintenance and upgrades are carefully planned, so they never fully interrupt traffic, a logistical feat in itself. The canal's reliability is one of its greatest strengths, and shipping companies plan routes assuming it will always be open. Few pieces of infrastructure on Earth operate with such consistency and global consequence. While most borders close at night, Panama's most important gateway never does. 20. An economy built on services, not factories. Unlike many countries that rely heavily on manufacturing or raw material exports, Panama's economy is overwhelmingly service-based. Logistics, shipping, banking, insurance, tourism, and trade-related services generate the majority of national income. The Panama Canal alone supports an entire ecosystem of ports, warehouses, ship services, and legal and financial operations. Because of this structure, Panama is less dependent on global commodity price swings than many neighboring nations. Income flows are often tied to transit fees, professional services, and international business activity, typically denominated in US dollars, and mirrored one-to-one in Panamanian balboa. This model has encouraged foreign companies to establish regional headquarters in Panama City. It has also shaped the labor market, favoring multilingual skills and technical expertise over industrial production. While this creates inequality challenges, it also gives Panama a unique resilience profile. The country does not build the goods that move through it, but it profits from making movement possible. 21. A geography that rewired global trade forever. Panama's narrow land bridge has had an outsized influence on world history and global commerce that far exceeds the country's physical size. For centuries, empires, traders, and engineers recognized that this thin strip of land was the shortest and most strategic connection between the Atlantic and Pacific worlds. Long before the canal existed, Panama functioned as a natural choke point where goods, people, and information were forced to pass. The eventual construction of the Panama Canal permanently altered shipping routes, cutting weeks off global travel times and reshaping trade economics across continents. Entire industries reorganized themselves around this shortcut, from oil transport to container shipping. Even today, shipping patterns, port development, and maritime strategy are designed with Panama in mind. Few countries have influenced how the world moves goods without being a manufacturing powerhouse themselves. Panama's power lies not in what it produces, but in where it sits. Geography, in this case, became destiny. Panama is a reminder that the most influential places are not always the loudest ones. This country doesn't dominate headlines, yet it quietly shapes how the world moves, trades, and connects. If one of these facts surprised you, it means Panama did its job. staying underestimated. Let me know in the comments which fact changed the way you see this country. And if you enjoy discovering the real stories behind nations, the next video is waiting for you.